Captain Kim Hannah pressed her hands against the cold metal railing of the bridge, staring out at the endless field of stars. The UES Defiant moved quietly through space, its engines humming softly as they pushed the ship forward on another routine patrol. She had been doing this job for 5 years now, and most days were exactly the same. Check the sensors, review reports, make sure nothing interesting was happening in their small corner of the galaxy. "Captain, we have something strange on the long-range sensors," called Lieutenant Park Jisoo from her station. Her young voice carried a note of confusion that made Hannah look up from her datapad. Hannah walked over to the sensor console, her boots, making small clicking sounds on the metal floor. The screen showed dots of light that shouldn't have been there, dozens of them, then hundreds, appearing from the dark, empty space beyond the edge of their galaxy. Each represented a ship, and they were big, really big. "What am I looking at, Lieutenant?" Hannah asked, though she was already starting to understand that something very bad was happening. "Known ships, Captain. They just appeared from nowhere. I count at least 3,000 contacts, maybe more." And Captain ... double quotes, checking her readings again. "These ships are huge. Each one is bigger than our largest battleships." Chief Engineer Lee Minho hurried over from his station, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. He had been working on the ship's engines for 20 years and had seen plenty of strange things, but the worried look on his face told Hannah that this was different. "Captain, if these numbers are right, we're looking at the largest fleet anyone has ever seen," Minho said quietly. "And they don't match anything in our records. These ships... they're not from any species we know." Hannah felt her stomach drop. For almost 200 years, the galaxy had been peaceful. Different alien species worked together under something called the Equilibrium Doctrine, which made sure that no one group became too powerful. The smart Zephyrians shared their advanced technology. The strong Krillians kept the peace with their mighty armies. Humans had earned their place by being adaptable and hardworking, even if they weren't the smartest or strongest species around. But now something was coming from outside their galaxy, something that didn't follow their rules. "How long until they reach the outer colonies?" Hannah asked. Jisoo worked quickly at her console, calculating distances and speeds. "At their current pace, maybe 2 weeks. But Captain, they're accelerating. Might get there sooner." The bridge fell silent except for the soft beeping of computers and the distant hum of the engines. Hannah looked at each member of her crew, good people who had families waiting for them back on Earth or the other human colonies. They had signed up to explore space and maybe deal with the occasional pirate or smuggler none of them had expected. "To face an invasion fleet, send an emergency message to Confederation Command," Hannah ordered. "Priority Alpha. Tell them we have unknown hostile forces approaching from outside the galaxy. Massive fleet, species unknown, intent unclear, but probably not friendly." "Yes, Captain," replied Communications Officer Song Yuna, her fingers dancing across her control panel. "Also get me Admiral Kim Tae-young at Fleet Headquarters. He needs to know about this immediately." While they waited for the communication to go through, Hannah studied the sensor display more carefully. The unknown ships moved in perfect formation, like they were all controlled by one mind. They didn't spread out to explore or send scouts ahead like normal fleets would do. Instead, they moved forward like a solid wall, heading straight for the populated areas of the galaxy. "Captain, I'm getting more detailed scans now," Jisoo reported. "These ships... their hulls are strange. They seem to absorb our sensor beams instead of reflecting them back. It's like they're made of some kind of living metal." Minho shook his head in disbelief. "Living ships? That's impossible. No species has that kind of technology." "Maybe no species in our galaxy," Hannah said grimly. "But these things came from somewhere else entirely." The communication system crackled to life as Admiral Kim Tae-young's voice came through from Fleet Headquarters. "Captain Hannah, what's your status? We're receiving some very disturbing reports." "Admiral, we've detected a massive unknown fleet approaching from dark space. Conservative estimate is 3,000 ships, each one larger than our biggest vessels. They're heading directly for the Outer Rim colonies." There was a long pause before the Admiral responded. "Captain, maintain your position and continue monitoring. Do not repeat. Do not attempt to make contact or interfere with these vessels. We're calling an emergency session of the Confederation Council. Understood, Admiral. As the communication ended, Hannah looked around at her crew again. They were scared, she could see it in their eyes, but they were still doing their jobs. That was what humans did best, she thought. When things got difficult, they didn't give up or run away. They kept working, kept fighting, kept trying to find a solution. The unknown fleet continued its approach, growing larger on their sensors with each passing hour. Soon the entire galaxy would know that something was coming, something that threatened everything they had built together over the past 2 centuries. Hannah didn't know it yet, but she was watching the beginning of the greatest war in galactic history. And before it was over, humanity would discover just how much they were capable of when everything they cared about was at stake. The Devourers had arrived. Admiral Song Hyun-woo looked out through the massive windows of the battle station. Harmony's edge and felt both pride and worry at the same time. Below him stretched the largest war fleet anyone had ever seen. Thousands of ships from 12 different alien species floated in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready for battle. The sight should have filled him with confidence, but something deep in his stomach told him this fight would be different from anything they had faced before. Admiral, this will be an easy victory, said Admiral Vexera, the Zephyrian commander. Her body looked like it was made of living crystal, and light danced across her surface as she spoke. My people have run the numbers through our best computers. We have a 94.7% chance of winning this battle. General Morden of the Krillians stomped over on his massive legs, his thick armor clanking with each step. He was built like a walking tank, with muscles that could crush steel and scars from 100 battles. My warriors have never lost a fight, he growled in his deep voice. These unknown creatures will learn what happens when they attack civilized people. Hunhua nodded politely, but he couldn't shake the feeling that their enemy might not fight like anything they had seen before. The human fleet was smaller than the others, only 3 battle groups compared to the dozens that other species had brought. Most of the alien commanders saw humans as good support troops, helpful but not really important to the main battle. Admiral Song called Captain Choi Minseok from his station, looking up from a screen covered with numbers and charts. The enemy ships have entered our sensor range. They'll be here in about 6 hours. The waiting was always the worst part of any battle. Across the huge fleet, thousands of crews prepared their weapons and checked their equipment. Everyone seemed confident. After all, the Confederation had never lost a major battle. Their technology was the best in the galaxy. Their ships were powerful, and they had more firepower than any enemy could possibly handle. But when the enemy finally arrived, everything went wrong almost immediately. The first thing Hyun-woo noticed was how the enemy ships moved. They didn't fly through space like normal vessels. They flowed like living creatures, their hulls rippling and changing shape as they approached. When the Confederation fleet opened fire, something impossible happened. The Zephyrian ships fired their particle beam weapons, energy blasts that could cut through the strongest armor like a hot knife through butter. But when the beams hit the enemy hulls, they just spread out and disappeared like water hitting a sponge. The enemy ship's surfaces seemed to change their basic structure in seconds, adapting to make the weapons useless. The Krillians launched their kinetic weapons next, massive metal projectiles that moved so fast they could smash tire moons into pieces. But when these devastating hammers struck the enemy ships, the hulls simply flowed around the impact points like thick liquid, absorbing the damage and healing almost instantly. Admiral, something's very wrong here, called Lieutenant An Ji-hoon from the science station, his voice shaking with fear. The enemy ships are learning from our attacks. Every time we hit them with a weapon, they figure out how to defend against it. They're adapting faster than our computers can even track the changes. What followed was the most terrifying battle in galactic history. Every ship in the Confederation fleet was designed by the smartest engineers and armed with the most powerful weapons available. They had defeated pirates, rebels, and hostile aliens for centuries. But against these new enemies, all their advantages meant nothing. The enemy ships seemed to get stronger with every attack. They studied each weapon that hit them, figured out how it worked, and then became immune to it. Worse, they started copying the weapons and using improved versions against the Confederation fleet, Hyunwoo watched in horror as the mighty Zephyrian flagship Eternal Logic, a ship that had never been damaged in 50 years of service, was torn apart in just 14 minutes. The massive Krillian dreadnought Mountain's Fury, which could destroy entire enemy fleets by itself, lasted only 18 minutes before it exploded in a ball of fire. All across the battle zone, the greatest warships in galactic history were being destroyed by enemies that seemed to learn and improve with every passing second. The careful formations that had worked for centuries fell apart as ships fled in panic, or simply eliminated before they could retreat. All ships fall. Back to the core worlds, Hyunwoo ordered, his voice heavy with defeat. This position cannot be held. The retreat lasted for 3 days. What had been the largest military force in history became scattered groups of survivors running for their lives. Hyunwoo's human ships stayed together better than most, picking up escape pods and covering the withdrawal of their alien allies. But even they couldn't stop the disaster. As news of the defeat spread, the unity that had held the galaxy together for centuries began to crack. The Zephyrians retreated to their crystal cities. Krillians fell back to their mountain fortresses. One by one, each species decided to defend their own worlds rather than work together. The equilibrium doctrine, which had kept peace for 200 years, was dead. And somehow humans found themselves among the few species still willing to keep fighting an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. The galaxy's greatest military force had been broken in 3 days, and the real war was just beginning. Dr. Yoon So-young sat in her laboratory on Luna Station, staring at computer screens filled with strange data that made no sense. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she was too focused to notice. In front of her were pieces of the enemy, ships that human rescue teams had collected from the recent battle. What she was learning about these fragments scared her more than the battle itself. "Quo, look at this." She called to her research partner, Dr. Bae Ji-ho, who was working at another computer nearby. "These aren't just machines, they're alive." Ji-ho walked over, rubbing his tired eyes. They had been working for 3 days straight without sleep, trying to understand how the enemy had defeated the most powerful fleet in galactic history. "What do you mean, alive?" "I mean, these ships are living creatures," So-young explained, pointing at the data on her screen. "Each one can change its own body structure in real time. When we hit them with a weapon, they don't just build better armor, they literally grow new types of skin that make our weapons useless." Ji-ho sat down heavily in a chair, the full meaning of her words hitting him. "So, we're not fighting spaceships. We're fighting giant space animals that can evolve in minutes instead of millions of years." "Exactly. And worse, they all share the same mind. When one ship learns something new, all the other ships instantly know it too. It's like fighting an enemy that gets smarter every time you attack it." Before So-young could explain more, the laboratory door opened and Admiral Park Jung-won walked in. He still wore his formal military uniform from the emergency meeting he had just attended, and his face showed the stress of a man trying to save an entire civilization. "Doctor, I need answers," the Admiral said without wasting time on small talk. "The galaxy is falling apart. The Zephyrians have locked themselves in their crystal cities. The Krillians are hiding in their mountain fortresses. 6 different alien species have already tried to make peace deals with the enemy." So-young turned her computer screen so the Admiral could see the data. "Sir, I think I understand how they work now. They have what we call a hive mind. All their ships are connected like parts of one giant brain. This brain learns by recognizing patterns in what we do, then figuring out how to counter our tactics. But there's something important," she continued, pulling up a new display that showed colorful charts and graphs. "Their learning system has a weakness. It takes time for their brain to process new information and send instructions to all the ships. If we can confuse their pattern recognition system, we might have a chance." Admiral Park leaned forward, interested. "Explain that in simple terms, Doctor." "Think of their brain like a very smart computer that's really good at solving math problems," So-young said. "But what happens when you give a computer a problem that has no logical solution? It gets confused and wastes time trying to figure it out. Just then, Captain Kim Hannah entered the laboratory. She had been promoted after helping to save many ships during the retreat from the big battle. Her uniform was still dirty from working on ship repairs, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Doctor, are you saying we should fight them by being deliberately unpredictable?" Hannah asked. "Exactly," Siowen replied, getting excited as she explained her idea. "Instead of using careful military tactics that follow rules, we do things that make no sense. We attack from random directions, use weapons in ways they weren't designed for, and make decisions that no logical computer could predict." Jiho looked skeptical. "But that goes against everything we know about warfare. Good tactics are based on logic and planning." "That's exactly why it might work," Suyang insisted. "Every other species in the galaxy fights the same way, with careful plans and logical tactics. That's why the enemy could learn to beat them so easily. But if we fight like crazy people, their learning system won't be able to keep up." Admiral Park thought about this for a long moment, weighing the desperate plan against the alternatives. Outside the laboratory, Luna Station buzzed with activity as humans worked around the clock to prepare for what might be their last stand. Refugee ships from other species had arrived, bringing survivors who were willing to fight alongside humanity rather than surrender. "It's insane," the Admiral said finally, "but insane might be exactly what we need." "Doctor, how quickly can you develop training programs based on your chaos theory?" "Give me a week," Seo Yang replied. "Admiral, this isn't just about fighting differently. We'll need to change everything, how we organize our fleets, how we communicate, even how we think about war itself." Captain Hannah stepped forward. "Sir, I volunteer to lead the first test unit. My crew and I are willing to try anything that might give us an edge." As the small group planned humanity's desperate new strategy, none of them knew that they were about to discover something amazing about their own species. While other aliens had evolved to be logical and organized, humans had kept something that turned out to be incredibly valuable: the ability to be completely unpredictable, and they needed to be. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were falling one by one to an enemy that could learn and adapt to any logical strategy. But humanity was about to teach the universe that sometimes the best plan is to have no plan at all. The news came in terrible waves across the galaxy. On Monday, the Zephyrian Empire fell. Their beautiful crystal cities, which had stood for thousands of years like perfect mathematical equations made real, were destroyed in just 6 days. The Krillian mountain fortresses, built so strong that everyone thought they could never be broken, were cracked open like eggs in less than a week. Ancient alien species that had survived wars, plagues, and disasters for millions of years simply disappeared as if they had never existed at all. Then came Tuesday, and it was Earth's turn to face the enemy. Admiral Kim Hannah stood in the control room of Luna Station, watching through the windows as the enemy fleet appeared from hyperspace. The sight made her stomach feel sick with fear. Nearly 10,000 enemy ships materialized in the darkness of space, looking like a swarm of metal insects coming to devour everything in their path. Her own forces seemed pathetically small in comparison, a few hundred human ships and whatever alien refugees had chosen to make their last stand with humanity. "All stations ready, Admiral," called Captain Lee Suman from her position at the communications desk. Around them in the control room, humans worked alongside aliens from a dozen different species. The last alliance in a galaxy that was going dark. World by world, Hannah took a deep breath and spoke into the fleet-wide communication system. "Listen carefully, everyone. Remember what we practiced. Every ship fights differently. Every battle must be unique. Don't give the enemy anything they can learn from or predict." The battle for Earth's solar system began in the strangest way any war had ever been fought. Instead of forming careful battle lines like proper military forces, the human defenders did things that made no sense according to traditional warfare at Mars. The red planet's orbital defense platforms didn't fight in organized formations. Instead, thousands of small ships swarmed around the enemy vessels like angry bees, changing their attack patterns every few seconds. Some ships attacked in waves, others flew in spiraling circles. and still others just charged straight at the enemy with no plan at all except to cause as much confusion as possible around Europa. Jupiter's ice-covered moon, the mining stations, became hidden bases for surprise attacks. Human fighters would burst out of the frozen tunnels, strike at enemy ships, then disappear back into the ice before the enemy could figure out where they had come from. Each attack was completely different from the last, sometimes using explosives, sometimes ramming attacks, sometimes weapons that had been built from mining equipment. On Titan, the industrial factories had been turned into weapon-making centers that produced the strangest ammunition anyone had ever seen. They fired projectiles that changed how they worked while flying through space. A missile might start as an explosive device, then transform into an electric weapon, then become a simple chunk of metal, all in the space of a few seconds. Even civilian ships joined the crazy battle. Cargo haulers, passenger transports, and mining vessels had been fitted with whatever weapons people could attach to them. These ships fought with the desperate creativity of people who knew they had nothing left to lose. Making up tactics as they went along, for the first time since their invasion began, the enemy encountered something their learning system couldn't handle. Every time they figured out how to defend against one type of human attack, the humans would switch to doing something completely different. When the enemy learned to fight against swarm tactics, human ships suddenly started fighting as individual units. When they adapted to individual combat, the humans would suddenly form into large coordinated groups and attack together. "Admiral, something interesting is happening," reported Dr. Yoon Soo-young from her science station, excitement creeping into her tired voice. "The enemy's ships are adapting much more slowly than before. Their learning system is having trouble processing all the random variables we're throwing at them." Hana allowed herself to feel a small spark of hope for the first time in weeks. Earth itself had become a nightmare for the invaders. The planet was surrounded by defense systems that changed their configuration every few minutes, operated by a population that treated military rules as suggestions, rather than laws that had to be followed. What should have been a quick victory for the enemy turned into the longest battle of the war. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Human ships were destroyed and replaced by new ones built in hidden factories. Brave pilots died and were replaced by volunteers who had never flown military ships before, but were willing to learn. The orbital defenses were damaged and rebuilt with whatever materials could be found. But somehow, impossibly, the humans kept fighting. They lost battles but won them back. They were pushed away from important positions, but found new ways to attack. Every defeat taught them something new about how to be even more unpredictable. The enemy, who had destroyed every other civilization in the galaxy with ease, found themselves stuck in a war they couldn't understand. They were fighting an enemy that refused to follow the rules, refused to give up, and refused to fight the same way twice. For the first time since their rampage across the galaxy began, the Devourers had met an enemy they couldn't break. Humanity stood alone at the center of the galaxy, and against all odds, they were holding the line. Dr. Yoon So-young sat alone in her laboratory at 3 a.m, surrounded by empty coffee cups and scattered papers. She had been working for months, studying pieces of enemy ships and trying to understand how their minds worked. Her eyes burned from staring at computer screens, but she couldn't sleep. Too many people were depending on her to find an answer. Then, at exactly 3:47 a.m., she saw it. "Jiho, wake up." She shouted to her research partner who was sleeping on a small cot in the corner of the lab. "I found it. Found their weakness." Dr. Beijio stumbled over to her computer, still half asleep and confused. "What are you talking about? What weaknesses?" So-young pointed excitedly at the data on her screen. "Look at these patterns. The enemy ships all share one giant mind, right? But that mind works like a huge computer trying to solve math problems. And we've been feeding it problems that have no logical answers." "I don't understand," Jiho said, rubbing his eyes and trying to focus on the complex charts and graphs. "Think of it this way," So-young explained, getting more excited as she talked. "Their hive mind is like a super smart calculator. It's really good at figuring out patterns and solving logical problems. But what happens when you ask a calculator to solve a problem that doesn't make sense? It gets confused and stops working properly." Within minutes, Admiral Kim Hana arrived in the laboratory, followed by Captain Lee Suman and several other senior officers. They all looked tired after months of fighting an impossible war, but there was still hope in their eyes. The war room filled with people who had been through hell together and were still standing. "Doctor, explain this discovery in simple terms," Admiral Hannah requested, looking at the complex data displays that covered every screen in the room. Seo Young took a deep breath and tried to put her breakthrough into words that everyone could understand. "Admiral, imagine the enemy's shared mind as one enormous computer that's trying to solve equations. But instead of giving it logical math problems, we've been feeding it pure chaos. Every random decision we make, every unpredictable tactic we use, it's like putting a virus into their computer system." Captain Park Jae-in, who commanded the experimental warfare units, leaned forward with interest. "Doctor, are you saying that we've been winning this war by accident? Our crazy fighting style has been breaking their minds without us even knowing it?" "Not by accident," Soo-yeon replied, shaking her head. "By being human." "Why?" "Every other species in the galaxy thinks in logical, organized ways. They plan their battles carefully and follow military rules. But humans are different. We make decisions based on feelings, intuition, and pure stubbornness. We do things that don't make sense to a logical mind." Dr. Jiho finally understood what his partner was saying. "So when we fight in ways that seem crazy, their hive mind can't process it properly." "Exactly. Their collective consciousness is designed to learn from logical patterns. But human creativity and chaos aren't logical. They're completely random. It's like trying to teach a math computer to understand art or music. The computer just gets confused and starts making mistakes." Admiral Hannah studied the data for several minutes, thinking about what this meant for the war. "Doctor, if this is true, then every time our ships have fought in unpredictable ways, we've been damaging their ability to think clearly." "Admiral. And the more chaos we create, the more damage we do to their collective mind. Look at these readings from the past few months of fighting. Their adaptation speed has been getting slower and slower. Their coordination between ships has been breaking down. Some of their vessels have even started acting independently instead of following the hive mind's orders." Captain Lee Soo-min looked up from studying the reports. "Admiral, this explains some of the strange behavior we've been seeing from enemy ships lately. Some of them have been attacking each other. Others have just stopped fighting and drifted away from the battle zones. Yesterday," added Captain Park, "one of their ships actually tried to communicate with us instead of attacking. It was like it was curious about something." Soyoung nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly what I would expect to see. Their hive mind is breaking down because it can't handle the chaos we've been feeding it. Individual ships are starting to think for themselves instead of following the collective consciousness." The room fell silent as everyone realized what this meant. They hadn't just been surviving against impossible odds. They had been slowly winning a war that no one thought could be won. Their desperate, chaotic fighting style hadn't just kept them alive. It had been the key to victory all along. "So what do we do now?" asked Admiral Hannah. "We increase the chaos," Soo-yeon replied with a grin. "We fight even more unpredictably. We make decisions that make no sense to anyone, including ourselves. We turn our human creativity and stubbornness into weapons that can break their minds. Completely." For the first time in months, the tired faces in the room showed something other than grim determination. They showed hope. Humanity had found a way to turn their greatest weakness, their inability to think in perfectly logical ways, into their greatest strength. The war was about to change forever.